Fire is supposed to be the end. Ashes scatter, smoke rises, and the body is gone. But what if fire could still deliver a message? Welcome to Somnolent Conspiracies, where we sift through cases that never should have happened, and yet leave behind undeniable traces. Tonight, we travel to Kyoto, a city of temples and traditions, where one crematorium has earned a reputation its caretakers never put on paper. The story begins with Detective Haru Tanaka. He had closed his last case, grieving from a personal loss, when an envelope arrived at his desk. The letter was written in the delicate hand of a woman he knew to be dead, a victim whose cremation he had attended only days before. The details inside the letter matched facts from her case no one else should have known. And worse, the postmark traced back to the Kyoto crematorium itself. Soon, more envelopes followed. Each was signed by a different deceased individual, all of them cremated at the same facility. The letters described not only their deaths but hidden details. Confessions, names of killers, betrayals among the living. The handwriting always matched the deceased. Detective Tanaka realized he wasn't just chasing criminals anymore. He was reading testimony from beyond the fire. Detective Haru Tanaka found the envelope on his desk at 7:12 a.m., before the noise of the bullpen rose to its usual pitch. It had no perfume and no flourish, only a cream face, a narrow slit of glue imperfectly sealed, and a neat square of postage impressed with a red postmark. Kyoto Crematorium as the return address, machine-stamped, official, unembarrassed. His name was written by hand in a script he recognized at once and could not accept. Haney Mori's, rounded strokes with a slight drag on the downstrokes. The way she wrote her M like two hills and a sudden cliff. Haru had signed the custody papers for her remains 3 days ago. He had stood by the cold hallway while her family bowed through tears and the furnace door rolled shut. He stared at the envelope long enough for the coffee on his desk to film over. The edges of the room fuzzed. The chatter of colleagues became a narrow hum, like air moving through a vent. He slid a letter opener under the flap. It cracked with the faint sound of paper fibers surrendering. Inside was a single sheet folded twice. It carried the faint odor of singed paper, as if it had been held near a flame, though the edges were clean. Haru, I could not leave without telling you where it is. The locket with the pressed ginkgo leaf, my mother's. It is where I hid it on the last morning, when I heard the keys. Under the tatami at the corner of the alcove, left of the vase, 2 boards in. Do not let him keep it. He will wear it to the funeral as if it were his. Haney. He read the letter twice, then a third time, because the shape of the words and the shape of his disbelief would not align. The ink had bled very slightly along a few fibers, the way it did when Haney used cheap stationery. There was a small crescent of graphite where the heel of her hand sometimes smudged her lines. The details were so ordinary they became impossible. Haru took the letter by the corners to the evidence bag, sealed it, labeled it, and signed the tag. His hand shook only at the end, where the T of Tanaka turned into a small hook. He remembered the locket from the crime scene photos. Gold oval, tiny hinge, a thread slim chain. Haney's mother had pressed a ginkgo leaf in it when Haney won a high school speech contest. Haney had told him so during an interview on a different case months ago, smiling with a shyness that made her look 14. The locket had been missing from her apartment when she was found, strangled in her narrow kitchen between a glossy black kettle and an unwashed teacup. He stood. The chair's wheels squeaked across the tile. Outside, a faint spring rain taped quietly against the station's windows. He could feel colleagues glance up and look away, a tide of curiosity that always withdrew when it met the shore of his face. He shrugged into his coat and left without telling anyone where he was going. He did not yet have language for it. Haney's building was a post-war rectangle on a quiet lane lined with persimmon trees. The landlord had changed the lock the day after the body was removed, but Haru still had access under the warrant for the ongoing investigation. He bowed to the landlord in the entryway, explained nothing, and climbed the stairs. Apartment 302 smelled like lemon cleanser and the residue of the life that had been scrubbed out. The curtains were open. A white, indifferent light sat on the countertops and the low table as if it had taken a seat to wait for the next occupant. The tokonoma, the small alcove for flowers and art, sat at the far wall with a simple vase and a blank paper scroll. It looked staged for a catalog, clean, polite, bereaved. Under the tatami at the corner of the alcove, left of the vase 2 boards in, he said aloud, to put the impossible instruction into the room. He knelt. The tatami gave under his weight with a quiet breath of straw. He set the vase aside, lifted the woven mat at the corner, and saw the fitted wooden boards beneath. The second board had a hairline gap, no more than a shadow. He slid a pocket blade into the seam and levered gently. The board lifted. There, wrapped in a thin square of handkerchief with a blue border, was the locket. He didn't touch it at first. He let the silence hold it. Outside, a bicycle bell chimed and faded. Somewhere above, a neighbor set something heavy on a counter. The world went on. The locket waited like a small verdict. He lifted the handkerchief, unfolded it, and saw the familiar oval. The hinge was a little stiff. He opened it and found the pressed ginkgo leaf, pale and perfect, veined like a palm. It had been flattened long ago. Its greenness was now a memory captured in paper's patient hunger. Haru exhaled. A part of him loosened and another tightened. The letter had told the truth. He photographed the scene. He measured the boards. He dusted the area for prints out of sheer stubborn procedure, knowing the prints would be old, smudged, and unhelpful. He wrapped the locket in a fresh evidence bag and labeled it to match the letter's tag. He closed the floor and replaced the tatami. He put the vase back on the alcove shelf, tilted the scroll's bottom edge until it hung perfect, and stood. The kitchen felt smaller when he returned to it. He imagined the last morning described in the letter, the scrape of a key, the quick press of a palm beneath the mat, the sliver of gold disappearing into a square of wood. He imagined the killer's hands on her throat, the tea gone cold, the sound of her body laying itself down because there was nowhere else to go. On the walk back, he bought a small umbrella from a convenience store, though the rain had thinned to mist. He did not open it. He wanted the brief, clean cold of the air in his lungs. At his desk, he logged the locket and the letter. By the time the evidence clerk initialed the entries, the story had already begun to bloom at neighboring desks. She wrote to him. Someone whispered, and someone else said, "Don't be stupid." And then, "No, the return address. Did you see it?" Inspector Koga, whose desk carried the smell of menthol lozenges and old coffee, leaned over the divider. "Tanaka," he said, with the humorless smile of a man trying to be collegial. "You look like you saw a ghost." His gaze snagged on the bagged letter. "What's that?" "A tip," Haru said, "from an anonymous source." "Anonymous," Koga said. "From the crematorium?" Haru's mouth made a shape that might have been a smile in a different year. "Looks that way." Koga's eyes weighed him. He had an instinct for weakness, the way a fisherman reads wind on water. "You ever think about a vacation? You've been doing doubles since." He left the sentence hanging in the stale air. Haru collected the letter bag from the counter. "I'm fine," he said, which was true in the narrow bureaucratic sense that he could perform the tasks required to keep his job. He returned to his chair and let the noise of the station move around him like a river he had stepped out of. He reread the letter in the plastic sleeve. The handwriting was not just similar. It was intimate. The loop of the H in Haney at the end tilted fractionally right, the way it had on every receipt and form she had signed. The line, "Do not let him keep it," burned colder than the rest. Him. The boyfriend had denied any knowledge of the locket. He had also tried to wear a tie to the funeral in a color Haney had always hated. That detail landed in Haru's mind with a small click, like a bead finding its notch on an abacus. He sent a text to the forensics unit to arrange a handwriting comparison, though he already knew what the conclusion would say. He wrote a short request to the postal inspector for the handling chain on the envelope. He drafted a formal inquiry to the crematorium for a list of mailings in the last 7 days and any staff with access to outgoing post. He did the cop things because he was a cop, and routine is the rope you hold when the dark water starts to lift. At noon, he walked to the crematorium. It sat on a hill above a bend of the river, modern concrete softened by cedar trees and the stoic kindness of moss. The air tasted like rain on warm stone. A pair of crows watched from a railing as he climbed the steps. Inside, the lobby was quiet and smelled of incense that had burned an hour ago and left its memory behind. A receptionist in a gray suit looked up with a practiced expression of compassion that did not yield to curiosity. "I'd like to speak with whoever manages outgoing mail," Haru said, showing his badge. "Of course," she said. "May I ask?" "Detective Tanaka," he said. "Kyoto Metropolitan Police." She made a call and gestured toward a low table with a small arrangement of white chrysanthemums. He waited. On the wall, a framed print showed a winter forest and a single path. He watched his own reflection on the glass like a stranger. A man in his 50s arrived, carrying a clipboard and the kind of calm that looked ironed on. "I'm Kurabayashi," he said. "Operations. How can we help, Detective?" Haru held up a photocopy of the envelope. "This came to my desk this morning. It lists your facility as the return address." Kurabayashi studied it, then offered a neutral nod. "We use a postage machine for official correspondence. Condolence forms, receipts, scheduling notices. We do not send personal letters." "Who has access?" "Myself, the front desk staff, and the night manager." He paused. "We also have a chute for ceremonial items, letters the families write and wish to be placed with the deceased. We do not post those, of course. They are burned with the remains." Haru watched his face for the flicker that lies cause. "Is there any possibility," he said, laying the words like planks across a gap, "that something placed in a coffin could reappear in the mail?" Kurabayashi did not laugh. "No," he said. He added, after a polite breath, "We take our responsibilities very seriously." Haru thanked him and asked for a list of the names of all employees who worked the day of Haney Mori's cremation. He received a photocopy inside of a clear sleeve, as if the paper could catch a contagion. On his way out, he passed the corridor that led to the furnace rooms. The door was closed. A faint warmth touched his cheek as if the building were sighing. He paused at the door and, for a moment, thought he smelled something like burned ink. The ghost of a library fire, one book at a time. Back at the station, the forensic lab called. The preliminary comparison found a high probability match between the letter and Haney's known samples. The terms were careful, scientific, uncommitted to the impossible. The clerk added, in a lower voice, "It looks like her hand, Detective, down to the pressure on the loops." Haru set the phone down, and his gaze fell to the evidence bag with the locket, the pressed ginkgo leaf a fragile moon behind plastic. He looked at the envelope again. The postmark was precise. The return address was unambiguous. There was no perfume, no sentimental flourish, no attempt to theatrically disguise the origin. Someone at the crematorium had sent him a letter in the handwriting of the dead, or the fire had. He did not decide which was worse. He logged his notes. He wrote the first line of a report and stopped after 4 words. He folded his hands and pressed his knuckles to his lips, the way he did when a thought tried to turn into a belief. Outside, the rain finally ceased. The city exhaled. Haru looked at the locked cabinet where he kept a different kind of letter, one he had never opened because it arrived after a night he still refused to name. He closed his eyes until the room steadied. When he opened them, the letter from Haney was still on his desk, real as the glow of the desk lamp, tangible as the weight in his chest. The crematorium was not just for the dead. It was writing back. Haru's discovery of the locket forces the case open, and his attention turns to the crematorium's staff and its mail, because if a letter can cross that threshold, someone, or something, is carrying it. The second envelope arrived 7 days later, at 8:03 a.m., slid beneath Haru's office door before the bullpen woke up. Same cream paper, same neat return, Kyoto Crematorium. Same clean, unsentimental stamp. The handwriting on the front was a practiced, slanted block, businesslike, no ornament. To Detective Haru Tanaka, from Kigo Nakahara. Kigo Nakahara had been a Kyoto name for decades, import logistics, construction, a portfolio of useful friends forged in the boom years. He had died the previous afternoon, quietly at home. His housekeeper said, dozing in his reading chair as the late light scratched thin gold through the shoji. The initial hospital report: natural causes. Heart fatigue at 81. The body had been transferred to the crematorium. The family was finalizing rites. Haru stood with the door half closed behind him, the envelope warm from the friction of being shoved under wood. The room held a watery winter sun. He set the envelope on his desk blotter, took a breath to smooth the shake out of his fingers, and opened it. Inside lay 3 crisp pages, the paper thick enough to carry pressure without bleeding. At the bottom of each page was a confident signature: Kigo Nakahara. The handwriting was not merely similar to samples the department kept in its background files. It had that personality good pens give to habit. The slight lift at the end of a line, the small impatience in the way he crossed his T's long and fast. Detective Tanaka. The symptom was not sleep. It was heat in the veins and a hard beating that did not belong to my age. The tea he poured me at 4 o'clock was bitter in a way barley tea is not. I said nothing because I do not like to be fooled in my own house. My nephew, Ryo Nakahara, has been helping with the accounts. Helping is a generous word. He has debts. I know this because he hid the ledger at the back of the lacquer chest in the guest room behind the burned receipts. There is a false back. You will find it if you slide the bottom panel up and pull. He thinks I do not know the old ways. The old ways made him rich enough to gamble with. If this letter reaches you, I will already be in smoke. I ask only that the ledger be taken and read, and that the teapot and cups from yesterday are not washed before you test them. The blue cup was mine. He switched them when he thought I was not looking. I am not sentimental. I built what I built by telling the truth even when it cost me friends. Tell him to tell the truth now. Kigo Nakahara. Haru didn't sit. He took the pages straight to the scanner, captured them into the case system, and sealed the originals. The choice felt like ritual. Document the impossible, then treat it like evidence until it betrays you. The clock on the wall clicked its way toward 8:10. The bullpen began to fill with coats and voices. He was already moving when he paged Inspector Koga. "House call," Haru said, grabbing his coat. "Whose?" "Nakahara Kigo." Koga's eyebrows went up. "I thought he went peacefully." "Maybe he didn't." Nakahara's house sat behind a low wall and a square gate framed in pine. The garden inside was arranged the way old money talks. Understated stone, a soft mound of moss, a single maple that had been coaxed into grace over years of quiet argument. A maid with red-rimmed eyes met them at the door. "The family is at the mortuary," she said, voice careful with grief. "The nephew is here. He is making calls." "We'll be quick," Haru said. "We need the teapot and cups from yesterday, untouched." And a moment in the guest room. The maid hesitated, then nodded. "In the kitchen," she said. I did not wash them. It didn't feel right. He told me to throw them out. But..." She bit the sentence off. Her eyes shifted toward the interior hall. "Who told you to throw them out?" Koga asked too casually. The maid swallowed. "Mr. Ryo." They found Ryo Nakahara in the study, backlit by a wall of books he would never read. He was 30, maybe, handsome in the way polished water is handsome, reflective, shallow, good at catching light. He wore a black suit that fit him like a promise made to someone else. His eyes ticked to Haru's badge, then to Koga, then to the corridor behind them where the maid had retreated. He smiled, the way men do when they have practiced in mirrors. "Officers," he said. "A loss for Kyoto. My uncle was a pillar." "We need to see the kitchen," Haru said. "Of course. Is something wrong?" The smile flickered, then steadied. It was gentle. He was reading. A small shake of his head, like he was rehearsing sorrow to find the right pitch. In the kitchen, the teapot still sat on the low burner, cold now. 2 cups waited beside it on a lacquer tray, one porcelain blue, one white with a hairline crack like a river in porcelain. The maid had covered them with a cloth. When she lifted it, a thread of stale tea scent rose, ghostly and metallic. "Don't touch," Haru said softly. He leaned to look at the lip of each cup. The blue one had a darker ring near the rim, a tea stain that had not yet fully set. He bagged both cups and the pot. We're taking these. I don't understand, Rio said, voice a shade too loud. What are you implying? We're grieving. We'll return them, Koga said, too pleasantly. In the guest room, Haru went to the lacquer chest without hunting. He had been in dozens of rooms like this. The place rich families put their secrets under the illusion that wood and heritage could keep them safe. He knelt, ran his fingers along the bottom panel, found the minute give where the runner ended, and slid up. The panel lifted with a sigh. Behind it, a cheap spiral-bound ledger, wedged deep and wrapped in a strip of old newspaper. He set the ledger on the tatami, flipped the cover. Numbers marched. Names. Amounts. There were annotations in a different hand than the main columns. Quick, irritated notes in a messy script. R, and early, and pay K, to shut up. Promises collapsed into figures that didn't add up. From the hall, Rio said, "Too fast. That is private property." My uncle, Haru repeated softly, and kept turning pages. On the 15th page, 3 deposits sat circled. On the 16th, a list of withdrawals matched the 3. On the 17th, a name, Rio. On the inside back cover, in neat block letters, a list of accounts and dates. Haru didn't need a letter to tell him this was motive. But the letter had told him where to look. By noon, he had the ledger, the teapot, and the cups in forensics. Ishii from toxicology pushed a hand through her hair, tied it up again, and looked at the teapot as if it were a suspect refusing to speak. "What am I looking for?" she asked. "A plant-based alkaloid," Haru said, and then, because he refused to be led by superstition into sloppiness, "Start wide. If there's anything that shouldn't be in tea, find it." By 2, the call came. "We've got something," Ishii said. "A cardiac-active compound, not normally present in barley tea. Enough to knock an old heart hard. It binds to certain channels, we're confirming with a second method. But the curve is clean." Haru closed his eyes. The relief that broke through him felt wrong, like cool water in a burned throat. "And the cups. Higher concentration on the blue cup," Ishii said. "The white one has trace. Your switch story tracks." He thanked her, hung up, and stared at the evidence locker through the glass. On the top shelf, the bagged ledger sat like a confession that hadn't learned to speak yet. By 4, a warrant had opened Rio Nakahara's phone. Debt collectors pulsed through his texts like hungry fish. A gambling marker in Osaka. An angry message from a woman called Kay, promising to talk to the old man if she wasn't paid. The pattern was the oldest in the book. Greed, fear, a bad idea dressed in a good suit. They picked Rio up at sunset. The maple outside his house had turned its leaves just enough to show a warning of red. He kept his jaw set all the way to the station, yet his hands shook when he signed the intake form. "You think a tea leaf killed him?" he said, with a short laugh that tried to sound worldly. "That's not how life works." "You're right," Haru said. "Life is messier. People put things in cups." When the lab's confirmation came at 9, Koga read it twice, slower the second time. "Toxicological confirmation," he said. "From tea residue and cup interior. Not natural causes." He slid the report across the desk to Haru with a look that mixed respect, irritation, and superstition in equal parts. "And how did you know to look?" Haru tapped the sealed envelope from that morning with one finger. He didn't push it across the desk. "A tip," he said again. Koga's gaze flicked down to the return address. He swallowed a comment and replaced it with a thin smile. "You're getting famous," he said. "People are asking, in whispers, if Tanaka has a new informant, if the dead like you." "I don't like them," Haru said. "I'm just listening." Word traveled in stations the way water finds drains. By morning, 2 more detectives had stopped by Haru's desk to ask, with professional casualness, whether the Nakahara arrest meant anything interesting about the crematorium. Someone pinned a scrap of paper to the corkboard outside records that read the crematorium rights back in block capitals before a sergeant tore it down. By noon, the newspaper gossip column, hungry for anything with a family name in it, hinted that a police source had reopened a natural death. By evening, A talk radio host said the word curse twice in one sentence and got a day's worth of callers. Haru didn't hear the radio. He went to the crematorium. It was near closing time, the light thin and gray, the building's glass reflecting a sky full of weather that couldn't decide. The receptionist recognized him and hesitated the way people do at the edge of a pool they are not sure is shallow. "Is Mr. Korabayashi available?" Haru asked. "He has gone home for the day." The night manager, then. She made a call. A man in his 30s came out, tie loosened, sleeves rolled once, posture already resigned to midnight. A badge on his lapel read, M. Suda, night manager. His eyes were the mild, careful kind that remember doors and keys. "Detective," Suda said. "I was told you might come by." "Then you know why," Haru said. He let the lobby's hush settle into his voice. A second letter arrived. "A man is under arrest because of what it led me to. I am done pretending this is a clerical error." Suda looked past Haru toward the corridor that led to the furnace rooms, then back. His face did not change, but some small muscle near his left eye made a decision. "We don't send letters," he said quietly, "but something does. If you want to understand what we can't explain, you'll need to see where explanations end." "Show me," Haru said. Suda's mouth tightened. "Not now," he said. "At midnight." "Why midnight?" "Because that is when the last rites end, and the building belongs to the fire." Haru watched his own reflection in the lobby glass, the detective's posture, the tired shoulders, the stubborn line of the jaw that had kept him alive in rooms where the air went thin. He nodded once. "I'll be here," he said. Haru returns at midnight to face the people who tend the fire, and the building that seems to remember more than it should. Haru returned at midnight with the city thinned to whispers. The crematorium's glass reflected a sky the color of cold steel. The cedars along the path hardly moved. Inside, the lobby lights were dimmed to a hush. The chrysanthemums on the low table looked like small, deliberate moons. Suda, the night manager, met him at the reception desk. His tie had been removed. His sleeves were rolled once, neat as a rule. "Thank you for coming quietly," he said. "We don't like to make scenes." "I'm not here for a scene," Haru replied. "I'm here for the truth." Suda's mouth moved as if to shape a polite answer and then thought better of it. "This way," he said. They passed the corridor to the family rooms, white walls, low chairs, a kettle forever set to a patient simmer. Beyond a keycard door, the tone of the building changed. The air grew warmer by degrees. Concrete took over from cedar. There was a persistent undertone like breath. A steady draft that came and went, as if the building were timing itself to something older than clocks. "Staff areas," Suda said. "Preparation room is to the left. Furnace rooms ahead." He paused by a glass panel where clipboards hung in pairs. Schedules, safety checks, maintenance logs. His hand rested idly near a column of dates. "We follow procedure," he added, the way a man says the lines he's practiced because he knows the lines are true, even if they're not all the truth. They passed a door with a rusted hinge that had not been replaced because no one used it. On the wall above the knob, someone long ago had signed a kanji with a grease pencil, half erased, half insistent. It might have been a name. It might have been a joke about names. Haru marked the door with a glance. "What's behind that?" he asked. "Storage," Suda said, too quickly. "Old parts. The original ventilation housing. We sealed it when we upgraded." He took a step forward as if to nudge them away with motion rather than argument. "How old is the original?" Haru asked. Suda hesitated just enough to be seen. "Older than the paperwork implies," he said finally. "Older than the last renovation. Older than me." They reached the furnace hall. The floor was a poured ribbon of concrete. 3 steel doors sat like sealed mouths along the far wall. Above each, a red status light slept. At the end of the row stood a 4th door with its controls taped over and a placard that read out of service. Someone had drawn a thin line of chalk beneath it, just a hand's breadth from the threshold, as if marking a boundary the eye could obey when the heart would not. A man in a gray work jacket stepped from the shadows by the 4th door. He was in his early 60s, with the compact build of a person who has lifted more than he has said. His hair lay flat against his head. His eyes were watchful the way watchmen's are, trained to notice beginnings rather than ends. "Detective," Suda said, "this is Mr. Onishi. He walks nights. He sees more than most of us." Onishi nodded without offering a hand. He looked like a man to whom skin and ceremony were separate things. "I keep the keys," he said simply, and from a ring at his belt he lifted a cluster, old brass ground down by years, newer steel cut by lasers, and one dark, ancient shape that looked hammered rather than milled. It hung a little apart from the others, heavy as a memory. "We don't send letters," Suda said, returning to his line with a stubborn gentleness. "We log every piece of outgoing mail. Families place condolence notes in the ceremonial slot." He gestured to a small chute set into the wall, a box with a modest dignity. "Those are burned as part of the rite. There is no mechanism by which anything can exit. Fire consumes." "And yet," Haru said. "And yet," Onishi echoed, his voice so steady it felt like a straight edge laid across the room. He stepped to the out-of-service door, placed a palm on the taped-over control panel, and listened. "It's cold," he said. "For now." Haru studied the seams of the steel. The tape had been applied with care. The placard sat perfectly level. He could see, in the dust on the floor, the faint pattern of footsteps that stopped at the chalk line and did not cross it. "Cameras?" he asked. Suda gestured toward the corners. Two domes watched the hall like soft eyes. "They cover the hall," he said. "Not the interior. We do not film the fire. Families have asked, and we do not." "Do the cameras catch the letters?" Onishi's mouth made a small shape that wasn't quite a smile. "Sometimes the lens goes white," he said. "It blooms for a second, as if someone put a hand over it. When the picture returns, there's paper inside the ash door." He angled his head toward a lower square hatch, waist-high, a feed used for collecting remains when the cycle ends. Its latch was bright with recent use. "Paper that is not burned," Haru said. "Unburned," Onishi confirmed. "Warmed. Sometimes the edges darken, but the words are there. They never smell like wood smoke. They smell like ink that has been close to heat." He glanced at Haru. "I didn't have a word for it until you came." Haru crouched by the ash door. The metal on the latch carried a memory of heat. On the rim of the hatch, a fine powder clung, gray, light. He touched a flake to the back of his glove. It collapsed on contact, left the faintest streak. He thought of the locket in its bag, the leaf inside as intact as a decision someone hadn't wanted to reconsider. "What happens?" he asked. "Before the letters appear?" "Nothing you can catch with a stopwatch," Onishi said. "Sometimes I hear a shift in the draw, like the building taking in a slow breath. Sometimes I hear a soft scrape. Sometimes it is only there when I look." "And none of you place them?" Haru's tone stayed flat, professionally boring. He needed the mundane question on the record. Suda's eyes tightened. "We are not fools, detective," he said, with a weariness that sounded honest. "We handle grief until it sticks to us. We are careful with the living and reverent with the dead. We do not manufacture hauntings for fun." Onishi said nothing for a beat. Then, "A letter slid out while I was alone 3 weeks ago," he said. The camera bloomed white. The hatch was closed. When I opened it, the envelope lay on the lip, too neat to have fallen. I watched the hinge. I watched the floor. I watched my hands. None of those things moved. The letter did." He held Haru's gaze. "It said a thing that was true." "What thing?" "That a man named Toma had sewn money into the cuff of his good suit," Onishi said softly. "His daughter took the suit to be altered. She found what her father did not trust a bank to keep. He had written his daughter's name. He had not told her in life." Onishi's eyes shifted to the chalk line and back, as if measuring a distance he could not speak. "The letter said where to cut." Suda exhaled through his nose. "We denied it," he said. "We said we must have missorted a ceremonial envelope. But there was no family letter that day. The log shows it. I did the log." They moved on. Suda led Haru into the preparation room. Stainless steel counters, a sink, a shelf of plain white envelopes used for filter paper, a neat row of brushes for Ash. The scent here was clean and bright, like a dental clinic that had decided to change careers. On a high shelf, a ledger lay open to a page of dates and times. The handwriting was tidy. The columns marched. No romance lived in the ink. "We don't write anything the families don't see," Suda said. "We keep no secret notes. We sign what we do." Haru let the room sit around him. He had learned to listen to buildings the way he listened to people. For small rhythms, for the story told by the wear on a threshold, the chip on a tile, the way a chair chose a corner. This room felt like a mind that avoided tangents. On the way back to the furnace hall, Haru slowed by the rust-hinged door again. The grease pencil kanji above the knob refused to be entirely meaningless. "You sealed this," he said. "Years ago," Suda said. "Before my time. The old corridor runs behind the furnace wall. It was part of an earlier design. Venting. A different way to draw air." He shrugged. "A different way to draw breath. Records. Incomplete," Suda said. "When the municipality renovated, they consolidated files. We have schematics back to the first concrete pour. Before that," he lifted his hands empty. "Stories. It was an execution ground in the Edo years, they say. But this is Kyoto. Everything is under something older." Onishi's keys whispered. He drew the dark, hammered one from the ring, weighed it in his palm, then slid it back into place. "We don't use that corridor," he said. "We chalk the line because it helps. It's easier to obey a line than a feeling." Haru let the silence stand.
Feelings sleet.
Lines did not until someone moved them. "Walk me through a night," he said. "From end of last rites to dawn." Onishi did it without flourish, like turning the pages of a manual he had memorized. "Families leave. We clean the family rooms, refresh the kettles, set the cushions. Ash cycles complete, we allow the temperature to step down. We collect remains gently with the brushes you saw. We sift. We set bones in the tray in order. That is the part people don't see, the order we keep. We prepare the urns. We log. We lock. The building grows quiet. The draft evens. Around 2, the fire sleeps as deeply as it ever does. If something wants to be a letter, it chooses then. If something wants to be a letter," Haru repeated. Onishi didn't flinch. "The fire remembers," he said. "That is what the old man who trained me said. He said it once and never again. He died the next spring." Suda's jaw set. "It sounds like superstition when we say it out loud," he said. "But our work makes people superstitious. If we don't respect the rules find us anyway." Haru looked again at the ash hatch. The latch gleamed softly, as if it belonged to something that blinked. He inhaled. There it was, that faint, uncanny scent, hot iron and ink. The first time he had noticed it, he had doubted his own mind, chalked it up to suggestion. Now it found him on its own. He thanked them both, wrote the official questions in his notebook with the official answers beneath, who had access, what was logged, when was maintenance last performed, had any staff been disciplined for mishandling mail. The ink looked ordinary on paper, dull as any other case. On the walk back down the corridor, he paused one last time at the rusted hinge. Closer, he saw that the kanji above the knob had once been 2 characters. Time had rubbed the tail from one so it looked like a smudge. The legible one read like a verb, to confess or perhaps to submit. He didn't put that in his notes. At the lobby, Suda stopped by the door and bowed, not to Haru but to the building, a small courtesy that felt practiced into bone. Onishi stood further back, as if he had already blended back into the hours that owned him. "If I have more questions," Haru said, "I'll return." "You will," Onishi said, not as a warning, not as a threat, simple as the time. Outside, the air had the slick chill that comes before rain you will never see. The night would spend its water somewhere else. Haru walked the hill down toward the river. The city was a map of small certainties, street lamps, vending machines exhaling friendly light, the late bus spooling its route like thread. He moved through those certainties and knew they were skin over something that had learned to pulse. When he reached his apartment, the hallway smelled faintly of detergent and someone's late curry. A single moth tapped at the stairwell bulb with gentle, useless insistence. Haru slid his key into his door, then noticed the triangle of cream beneath it. An envelope rested on the mat. Same paper, same neat machine return, Kyoto crematorium. No sender's name this time, only his, in a hand that made the bones under his ribs tighten. Haru. He unlocked the door, carried the envelope inside, and set it on the table without opening it. The room listened. So did he. The third letter waits in his apartment, addressed to him in the hand he knows too well. He sat with the envelope on his kitchen table as if it were a sleeping animal that might wake if he breathed wrong. The apartment was plain. 2 rooms, a narrow balcony, a kettle that took its time. The only sound was the clock above the stove, ticking like a small heel on tile. He turned the envelope so the light hit the ink. The return was the same, Kyoto crematorium. The addressee was not Detective Tanaka or Officer or even H. Tanaka. It was a single word written in a hand that could make him 30 again with one glance. Haru. He opened it carefully. Inside was 1 page. The first line hit him before his eyes finished reading it, because his mouth shaped the sound the way it had, in another kitchen years ago, in a different city, when the night had been generous and the tea had been too sweet. Kite, do not follow the fire too far. The nickname was the kind that never makes sense when explained. On their second date at the river, the wind had lifted a child's paper kite straight up and then set it down on Haru's shoulder with a soft clap, as if choosing him. She had laughed until her eyes watered, pressed her forehead to his, and said, "Mine then, my kite." Only Mika had ever called him that. Not a friend, not a colleague, not even his mother when she wanted him softened. Only Mika. He read the whole letter standing. The handwriting had its old impatience. Loops that refused to close, the little climb of her T-bars when she got earnest, the way she never learned to make a round because the slanted one looked faster. I can see the road now the way I could not when it mattered. The radio was playing that song you hated, horns and bright brass like a parade that didn't know our lane was narrow. The wiper on the driver's side left a thin arc in the corner because you hadn't replaced it, and I told you to, and you said, "Tomorrow," because you always meant it when you said that word. I am writing because the letters are hungry for hands to catch them. They come without choice. But this one I make a choice to send. You will go where you always go, toward the door that is closed. You will carry your notebooks and your steadiness like a lantern. You will think you can step just to the edge of the heat and not past it. Do not follow the fire too far. The fire remembers what it is given. It does not give back without a price. It will talk to you in the voices you most trust. It will write in my hand again if it keeps you a step closer to its mouth. When you cannot sleep, make barley tea and count the 7 cracks in the blue bowl. You denied there were 7. There are. I am counting with you. Kite, keep the part of you that knows the difference between a glow and a glare. If you must test it, do it with things that can afford to be burned. If you can bear it, let me go in the places where I am truly gone. Mika. He forgot to breathe. His body remembered halfway down the second paragraph and pulled air in too quickly. He sat, and then he didn't sit, he folded. The chair leg barked the floor. The letter stayed in his hand because his fingers refused to open. She was the only person who noticed the imperfect arc the wiper left at the top corner of the driver's sweep. She was the only person who counted the hairline cracks in the old blue bowl and argued the number like a game. She had that small cruelty of the deeply honest. She would not let him lie about small things. The accident had been a clean thing, according to the report. A truck had changed lanes. Rain had come hard and brief. The city's throat had been full of light. He had never read the last page of the file. He had a letter he had never opened from her sister, written after the funeral, waiting in the locked cabinet like a dare and a kindness. He pressed his fist to his forehead until the skin ached. The room came back like a shore out of fog. The table, the kettle, the unwatered plant he kept stubbornly alive out of principle. He placed the letter on the table and stepped away from it as if from a drop. He poured water and forgot to drink it, He did not sleep. He didn't even try. The city slid through its dark mechanics outside the glass. He stood on the balcony at 2 and watched a cat cross the alley with the certainty of someone who had never read a map. He told himself the letter could be forgery, manipulation, a trick cut from a file he didn't know someone had. He told himself handwriting could be copied, words guessed, nicknames overheard. He said it out loud, and the simple physics of the sound did nothing to change the weight under his ribs. He put the letter in an evidence bag because that is what his hands knew. He labeled it private and wrote only his initials. He slid it into the bottom drawer of a cabinet already heavy with careful lies. At 7 he shaved, because Koga would look for any fray in him to pull. At 8 he walked into the station with the exact face he wore when nothing was wrong. At 8:11 he sat at his desk, opened his notebook, and drew a line down the page. Facts, he wrote. 1. 2 letters in 2 weeks led to true, actionable evidence. 2. Delivery logistics impossible under normal operation. 3. Third letter addressed to residents, personalized, contains closed-world knowledge. He stopped before 4 because the next word would be Mika and the paper was not a place to write her name today. Koga appeared with a coffee and the look of a man who knows exactly how long someone has been in the building. "You look like a man who didn't sleep," he said. "I slept enough." "You missed the rumor," Koga said, sitting on the divider as if it were a bench at a game. "They're saying the crematorium is your pen pal. They're saying you've found religion." "I have found evidence," Haru said. Koga's eyes slid past the folders to the locked drawer. "Don't make me assign you a counselor. Paper is one thing. Talking to it is another." "I'm not talking to paper," Haru said, and surprised himself with the quiet truth of it. Koga held up a hand, surrendering this small ground. "We got a message from City," he said instead. "Someone powerful wants us to be careful with Nakahara's name in the press. They are using words like optics." He made the word sound like sickness. Haru nodded. The machine was grinding in the background, as always. He let it grind. He answered 2 emails so ordinary they felt like forgiveness. He initialed a chain of custody form. He avoided his own eyes in the dark shine of the monitor. At noon, he walked back to the crematorium. Suda met him in the lobby, looking like a man who had aged 2 years between midnight and lunch. "We prefer scheduled visits," he said, but the sentence lacked muscle. "I won't be long," Haru said. "I brought something." He lifted a small, new notebook from his bag. A cheap, blank thing with a stiff spine and pages that begged to be written on. He set it on the reception desk between them. "I want to put this into the fire." Suda's eyes flicked to the corridor as if it could hear its name. "We do not place items that are not part of rites," he said slowly. "Families bring letters, photographs, beads, sometimes a favorite book. We advise against metal. We log objects. We do not run experiments." "This one is logged," Haru said, sliding a copy of a form across the desk. He had filled it out on the bus, his pen riding each pothole. He had written control in the box that asked for family relation. No ink on the pages. No writing. New. Suda did not touch the notebook. "Why?" "Because if the fire is writing," Haru said, noticing the word and not apologizing for it, "I want to see who it writes to when there's nothing to catch." Suda stared at him for a long moment. "You think it will write to you?" "I think it will write to whoever is willing to read," Haru said. "But yes, if it must choose, I want it to choose me." Suda looked like a man who wanted to say no and knew he would say yes. He exhaled, a small surrender. "There is a cycle at 3, he said. "Unclaimed remains. No family present. We sometimes help those pass without audience. You may place your blank with that if you do not interfere." "I will not," Haru said. Afterward, Suda added, "If anything happens, you will not tell your newspapers that we turned a furnace into a stage." "I will tell them nothing," Haru said. "I am not chasing a headline." On his way back to the corridor, he passed Onishi, who was coiling a hose with the economy of a man who hates tangled things. "Keys," Onishi said, a greeting and a philosophy. "Not yet," Haru said. "Something smaller." Onishi glanced at the notebook. His face moved once, some thought crossing like a cloud. "Be careful what you give it to work with," he said. "When fire runs out of fuel, it will eat what holds it." Haru thought of the letter on his table calling him Kite and the tiny flare those 4 letters had lit in him and how quickly the flare had burned the air thin. "I brought only paper," he said. "Paper is hungry," Onishi said mildly, and went back to his hose. Haru took the blank notebook to the small chapel where families sometimes sat before a curtain, where the curtain sometimes opened and sometimes did not. He turned the book in his hands. He had not written in it. He had not even cracked the spine to hear that small, pure sound new pages make. He wanted the test to be rude in its simplicity. He checked his phone. A message from Koga glowed there. "City calling again. Smile for the cameras." He put the phone face down. At 2:56, Suda opened the side door to the furnace room and nodded once. "Now," he said. Haru followed him into the heat. Haru will place the blank notebook into the cremation, then wait to see what the fire returns, if anything at all. At 2:59 p.m., Suda swiped his card and ushered Haru into Furnace 2. The status panel glowed an indifferent green. The room's heat wasn't yet hostile. Only the kind that slid into your sleeves and stayed there. Onishi stood by the ash hatch with his keys and his graveyard calm. "Unclaimed remains," Suda said, voice low, as if announcing names to a winter room. Name recorded as Eiko Naruse, 76. A municipal funeral. No family attending. "Logged?" Haru asked. Suda touched the clipboard. "Logged," he said, and wrote, 3 o'clock, Naruse E. Municipal no attendees notebook Detective Tanaka, placed at intake by staff consent. He underlined consent once, a quiet emphasis, and handed Haru a disposable sleeve and mask. Haru held up the notebook. Cheap, blank, the spine uncracked. He flipped it in his palm once so they all saw the emptiness of it, then slid it into the coffin at the chest, above the linen sheet that held what the world leaves behind. There was nothing ceremonial in the gesture, no incense, no bow, only the ordinary violence of a test. "On the record," Haru said, eyes on the lens in the corner. "No writing inside." Suda closed the door. Metal met metal with that final, gentle kiss good engineering makes. He keyed the sequence. Ignition lit amber, then steady. The room's breath changed. Air drew in through somewhere you could not point to. Warmth accumulated the way a thought does when you stop arguing with it. They waited. Suda busied himself with small, loyal tasks. Tidying a tray that was already straight, adjusting a hose that did not need it. Onishi stood with his hands folded over the ring of keys as if they were a single heavy thought he was tired of carrying. Haru watched the panel without blinking. He had the animal certainty that if he looked away, a trick would happen at the corner of the stage. At 3:48, the camera in the corner bloomed white for one breath and cleared. "I saw it," Suda whispered, as if afraid to offend the electronics. The bloom. At 3:51, Suda lowered the temperature in 3 small steps. At 4:07, he keyed the cool down. The red light above the ash hatch dimmed from warning to invitation. The room's draft softened. Somewhere deep, something that had been working decided it could stop. Suda looked at Onishi. Onishi nodded once. Haru knelt at the hatch. The metal still carried heat like memory. He unlatched and lowered the door. The faint powder smell drifted out, dry, mineral, intimate as paper that has been erased too many times. Bone fragments lay in their deliberate order, sifted by flame and gravity. Ash banked at the edges like a tide that had considered going further and thought better of it. And there, set on the lip as neatly as a placed offering, sat the notebook. Its cover was darkened at the corners, the laminate puckered. When Haru touched it, with gloves, because he had promised himself he would not lose his hands to wonder, it was warm the way something is warm after a person has been holding it for a long time. "Record," Suda said to the room, "because that is what you say when reality attempts a trick." Notebook recovered from ash hatch immediately post-cycle. Haru lifted it. The spine, which should have softened, held. He opened the cover. The first page was full. A hand had written without line guides, each sentence steady. as if the wrist had known the page before seeing it. The ink had dried to a faint sheen. It had that tiny, telltale capillary bleed of ballpoint on cheap paper. At the top, in a small, practical hand, Eiko Naruse, municipal survivor, daughter K. Naruse, Osaka, address on file with city. Pension office sample signature, match. Under it, Haru's breath snagged, the writing changed. The strokes slowed. The letters leaned left in a way you only acquire by signing forms in a clinic. It was a different hand, uneducated in flourish but exactingly itself. Detective Haru Tanaka, I did not want to burn. I am not a person for fire. In the market, I always stood by the iced fish because it made me feel awake. But they did it right, the men here. They brushed my bones the way my mother brushed my hair. Straight, not hard. You put a blank so your hands would have something to do. Now you will want a proof that does not feel like magic. Tomorrow at 4:12 p.m., by the willow at Sanjo Bridge, hail will fall like rice in a wedding bowl. A branch will split and come down. Step back one pace and you will not be struck. Step forward and your shoulder will bruise and you will lie about the pain. Tell my daughter Kiyomi the green tin with her father's train tickets is inside the gas meter box, wrapped in cloth. The key for the box is taped under the sink. I forgot to tell her. I am telling her now. She had signed it. Eiko, a plain name made tender by the pressure of the last stroke. Suda made a sound that was not a word. Onishi stepped closer, bent, and looked at the letters with the suspicion of a man who knows how gravity behaves. He pinched a corner of the page, felt the paper's unremarkable thickness, then put his hands behind his back again as if they could betray him if he let them. Bag it, Haru said, his voice too even, and handed Suda a sleeve. He turned the next page. There were only 2 more lines, written smaller, as if the writer had run out of time or privacy or nerve. The fire remembers. Do not feed it names you want to keep. Haru closed the notebook. He held it in his gloved hands the way he had once held a newborn wallet in a pickpocket case. Cautious, unwilling to trust that something so light could be this heavy. Chain of custody, Suda said. He sounded like a man praying in a mechanical dialect. He logged the time. Onishi added his initials in their square, careful block. Haru signed last, and only when he could control the shape of his letters. In the prep room, they set the urn for Eiko Naruse together in silence, bone by careful bone, until a life fit into porcelain with astonishing politeness. Onishi tied the white ribbon on the lid with a craftsman's hands. Suda checked the label twice, then once more for luck he wouldn't admit to. Her daughter, Haru said, tucking the notebook into an evidence case. City has a contact? Suda nodded. Municipal records will have an address from 2 winters ago. If she has not moved, she will open the door and argue about whether you should take your shoes off. Haru breathed a short, humorless huff that was almost a laugh. I will take them off, he said. He did it that evening. Kiyomi Naruse was 50 with the fierce economic patience of people who know how to make 2 good meals out of what looks like one. She cried only when the green tin clanged against the gas meter's edge, then laughed, a shocked, delighted sound, when she saw the folded train tickets inside, her father's dates and station names written in that stubborn square hand. He never threw anything away, she said, like a complaint and a benediction. Thank you, detective. How did you? A note at the crematorium, Haru said, because the day had been a lie already and he had run out of ways to be clever. From your mother. Kiyomi stared at him, then at the tin, then at the square of old cloth it had been wrapped in. She set her mouth. My mother would be furious with the waste of postage, she said, but she would be glad. She bowed. He bowed in return and took his shoes to the genkan like a student. He slept in short, guarded pieces of night. The next day at 4:08 p.m., he stood by the willow at Sanjo Bridge, in a suit that did not fit the season and under a sky that could not decide whether it was finished with summer or not. People flowed around him. A couple laughing at nothing, a boy dragging a backpack like it was a pet, an elderly man leaning on the rail as if it had a memory to share. At 4:11, the air cooled the way a stairwell does when a window is open far away. He almost smiled at his own nerves. At 4:12, the sky opened. The hail came sudden and theatrical. White pellets like thrown rice stinging the river and the upturned faces. The afternoon spinning from postcard to emergency with the small joy of weather. A child squealed and clapped. Someone swore. The willow made a sharp, surprised sound and let go of a limb. It swung, tore, and fell exactly where Haru had been standing one pace before. The branch struck the stones with a crack loud enough to turn heads. Haru was already 2 steps back. He had not meant to move. His body had liked being alive more than it liked being right. He stood there with the stupid, grateful grin of the nearly hit. Water crawled cold behind his collar. The hail softened to rain as quickly as it had come. People shook themselves and went back to their afternoons. The branch lay across the path like a punctuation mark only he could read. That evening, he placed the notebook from Furnace 2 on his kitchen table next to Mika's letter. He did not let the edges touch. He called Ishii in handwriting comparison. He wanted to know, from someone paid to be unromantic, whether the first page's header had been a cheat. By mid-morning the next day, she called back. The top 3 lines are logged hand, office staff. The body text, she said, matches the pension office records for Eiko Naru's. High probability match. There are age tremors in the strokes, and the little hesitation on the R. I'd bet my grant on it. Thank you, Haru said. He looked at the window. Somewhere in the city, someone was telling a story into a phone about hail in September, and someone else was saying you're making that up, and a third person was shrugging because the branch had already been dragged to the side. He stared at the 2 envelopes, one that called him kite, one that saved his shoulder with a sentence, and felt the shape of the case change. It was no longer about a trick that could be unmasked by supply closets and night logs. It was about a conversation. Conclusion was wrong. It implied stillness. But Haru had a conclusion anyway. Whatever this phenomenon was, mechanism or myth, it produced truth with enough precision to cut. He could not arrest it. He could only decide how close to stand. He slid Mika's letter back into the drawer he kept locked and turned the key because he still liked the sound. He kept Eiko's notebook out on the table, an ugly, miraculous object that misbehaved by existing. He called Suda. Tomorrow, he said, I want to look at your records before concrete. Suda was quiet a beat. You want the history. I want someone who will not lie to me about legends, Haru said. An historian. The right one. Suda exhaled through his nose, a sound like surrender and relief sharing a chair. There is a man, he said. He keeps a room above a shuttered bookstore and writes grant proposals no one funds. He knows the old names for the hill we stand on. He will offend you and then apologize the way old men apologize, with tea and a story you did not ask for. What's his name? Professor Daichi Hayama, Suda said. He says the fire remembers because the ground does. He will tell you why. Haru seeks Professor Hayama and the history beneath the crematorium, the Edo-era execution ground, the confessions, and the debt every letter seems to demand. Professor Daichi Hayama kept his history over a shuttered bookstore with a blue awning that still promised travel guides to people who had stopped traveling years ago. The stair creaked like a man with opinions. When Haru reached the landing, a brass bell, no battery, all gravity, ticked once. Detective Tanaka, the voice called, old but not frail. Come in. I made tea that refuses to improve with time. Hayama's room was a low ceiling under a high drift of paper. Maps thumbtacked in layers. Ink rubbings. Photographs of stone markers no one visited on purpose. A kettle rattled on a single burner. The old man himself wore a cardigan the color of unpolished pewter and a look that said he had been expecting the 20th century to end differently. Suda had been right. The first thing Hayama did was offend him, by peering at Haru's face the way one inspects an inscription, and the second was apologize with tea and a story he did not ask for. You work where the city tried to forget, Hayama said, setting a chipped cup before Haru. The hill had 3 names and none of them printed on tourist maps. In the Edo years, it belonged to the magistrate's office, not the temple. They called it a wind hill not because of weather, but because the breath moved through it. You understand me? Air flows, Haru said. Drafts and chimneys. The furnaces speak that language. Hayama smiled at the word furnaces, then flattened it with a palm. Before furnaces, he said. He tapped a map with a forefinger gone square at the tip. The records are shy, but the oral histories are shameless. Prisoners were made to write confession, repentance, last will, the bureaucratic prayer of the condemned. Brush and ink on mulberry paper, then burned. He reached for a drawer and pulled out a rubbing. An old wooden plaque with kanji so worn the strokes looked like wind. Zhang to confess still legible. We burn many things to make them holy, detective, Hayama said. But there is a category of burning that attempts accounting. Those who ran the place believed that words, once bound to ash, were sealed to truth. Judges liked the feeling of seals. Priests liked the feeling of smoke. He let that sit, then offered a line like a proverb and watched to see whether Haru would treat it like one. Ink and ash bind truth tighter than flesh. It is a line from a late Edo pamphlet, he added, suddenly academic. Anonymous moral theater. Bad verse. Good instinct. Haru pictured the chalk line in the furnace hall and the rusted door with the half-erased kanji above it. He told Hayama about the corridor behind the wall, the sealed venting, the sense that the building kept a second throat. The old draft path, Hayama said, pleased. He pulled another map from beneath the first, narrower, older, a map with rivers that had since been disciplined into prettier shapes. The wind path ran here. He laid a string along the route, from the ridge down to the river bend. If you build a modern crematorium over a place with a habit of carrying breath a certain way, your new breath will be persuaded by the old one. You're saying the ground remembers. I am saying we remember for the ground, Hayama corrected gently. We build the same corridors because the city feels right when air moves there. We chalk the same lines because someone chalked them before and whoever came later didn't want to anger an arrangement they couldn't name. We call it superstition when we want to feel smart. Haru sipped tea that tasted like apology and camphor. People are receiving letters, he said, in the hand of the dead, with details only those people should know, with predictions that come true. A branch at Sanjo Bridge, hail like rice. He heard the edge in his own voice and set it down. I'm not asking you to bless the miracle. I'm asking you to talk to me like a plumber who knows where the old pipes run. Hayama's eyes softened at plumber. Good, he said. Then we can speak plainly. If you force people to write on the edge of death and you burn those words in a draft that the city keeps using, you make a habit out of testimony. Habits are how places learn. Yours is a building that learned, over centuries, to carry messages from the moment of leaving. Now you feed it modern paper and modern grief, and it produces what it has been trained to produce. A mechanism, Haru said, half hopeful. A temperament, Hayama said. Mechanism if it keeps you calm. Temperament if you prefer romance. Either way, there's a rule underneath. The words want a witness. They are not content to burn. Meaning seeks a pair of eyes. If those eyes are yours, they will keep finding you. Haru thought of Eiko Naru's notebook, warm as if recently held. What is the price? He asked. Hayama did not pretend not to understand. Ah, he said, and set his cup down with a small ceramic patience. We like to imagine truth is a gift that keeps giving. In my experience, it keeps asking, how? The old stories say if you accept a last letter, you accept an errand, Hayama said. Deliver a message, clear a name, point to a buried tin, tell a daughter about a key under a sink. If you do not carry the task, the letter will return to you in another form. If you ignore it, the next message will be personal, addressed in a hand you cannot bear to refuse. Every letter demands a debt. He looked at Haru not unkindly. You have already been billed. Haru did not look at the place in his chest where Kite had landed and keep landing. What happens if you keep paying? The world gets cleaner in inconvenient places, Hayama said dryly. Thieves get named. Boxes get opened. Families bury what should have been buried long ago. And the corridor behind your fire learns your name the way a house learns the sound of its owner's step. And if I stop, the debt goes somewhere, Hayama said. And this time there was nothing like joke in his voice. He reached to the wall and tapped the grease pencil character for confess on a photograph of a door very like Haru's rusted one. Old beliefs are simple machines. What isn't carried becomes weight. Weight needs a shelf. If you don't hold it, someone else will. Or the house will. He shrugged. Places break. Men break. He stood with a careful slowness and rummaged in a flat file until he found a woodblock print, cheap, smeared, the kind that had been pasted to street corners. A man knelt beside a brazier. His hands held a sheet over the coals. A clerk looked away. The caption read something like, Registrar of Sins. Execution grounds were admin buildings with delusions of theology, Hayama said. Write, burn, carry. Your chalk line exists because somebody had the sense to mark a point beyond which clerks should not walk. Can we unteach a building? Haru asked. We can move the classroom, Hayama said. Seal corridors, change drafts, pour concrete over old mouths. But the city is a slow animal. It is easier to change a habit than a nature. You can make your place quieter. You cannot make it forget. A small bell chimed from the street, a delivery bike refusing to be a truck. Hayama tilted his head, listened as if it mattered to the history. You will be tempted, he went on, to ask more, to set more blanks, to treat the fire like a colleague who finally tells the truth. Be careful. The more you lean, the more it will give you the kind of truth that needs your hands. And your hands are not infinite. Haru looked at his own, steady, used to pens and cuffs and zippers on body bags. I can choose not to read, he said, and heard the lie the way a tightrope hears the footstep. You can choose not to open, Hayama allowed. But envelopes travel. Some arrive without stamps. Haru told him about the chalk line, the camera blooming white, the letters that appeared on the lip of the ash hatch, too neatly placed to call accident. He told him about the smell of hot ink. He did not tell him about kite. He did not need to. Hayama had the patient rudeness of men who have watched too many patterns not to infer the missing tile. Bring fewer names into the room, Hayama said at last. Do not feed it names you want to keep. If you must test it, test with facts that can live in daylight. Keep your nights to yourself. He walked Haru to the stairs. At the top step, he put a palm against the wall and pushed gently, as if checking a hinge. If you insist on going back, he said, carry salt in your pocket, not because it will stop anything, because it will remind you not to eat what is offered. It was an old man's joke. It was not. Outside, the afternoon had the color of old coins. On the way back to the station, Haru passed a vending machine that had jammed on a bottle and saw his own reflection behind the stuck drink. Thin, patient, tired, the way men look when they have been borrowing sleep from tomorrow for too long. At his desk, there were 3 envelopes waiting on the blotter. One postmarked with the crematorium machine. One with no postmark at all. One with a return address from a temple he had never visited. All 3 in hands that fluttered his throat for a different reason. He opened the first. A man apologizing in a tight, careful script for selling a set of antique bowls that were not his to sell, and naming the pawn shop. He opened the second. Haru in a hand that was not Mika's but knew the side streets of his childhood. Someone from a case 5 years ago finally willing to tell the whole story about a missing photograph. He opened the third. For words, block printed, clean as a stamp, checked the chalk line. He stood. He did not take his coat. He walked. At the crematorium, the lobby smelled like lilies and damp umbrellas. Suda was at the desk with a mind somewhere else. Onishi was not in sight. Haru nodded once and took the corridor at a pace that did not look like running. In the furnace hall, the chalk line had been scuffed. One small, deliberate swipe of a heel an inch over the mark. The out-of-service placard hung level, innocent as ever. The camera in the corner blinked its little red assurance. Haru crouched by the line, the way men crouch when they examine animal tracks they are not sure they want to identify. He felt it then. A draft, no more than a whisper, drawing from the sealed corridor toward the hatch. A patient breath, learning a new name. Every letter demands a debt, Hayama had said. Haru felt the weight gather. The letters come faster now. True, half-true, impossible. and the city begins to drown in paper while the fire learns Haru's name. The first cart came on a Monday. It rattled in from the mailroom stacked with cream envelopes bound by rubber bands that had already surrendered to humidity. Someone had taped a sheet to the handle for debt H. Tanaka, as if the cart were a patient being wheeled to a ward. The return address on the top envelope was the same machine stamp as always, Kyoto Crematorium. The rest were a mixture, temples, apartment blocks, no return at all. Some were slipped under his office door. Some were leaned against his chair like offerings. One had been wedged under his windshield wiper so precisely that the wiper's rubber did not crease. By Wednesday, there were 2 carts. By Friday, the clerks started leaving them outside his door before he arrived. The station hummed around the carts like a building around a scaffolding it hadn't asked for. Haru made rules because rules are how drowning men pretend to swim. He cleared his whiteboard and drew 3 columns with a ruler he usually used for crime scene photos. Actionable, verifiable names, addresses, specific objects, immediate harm, archive, grief without tasks, confessions with no living target, mysteries he could not touch, impossible claims that bent time, physics, or the jurisdiction map. He read, bagged, logged, triaged. He learned the feel of hot ink as a scent. He learned the sound a paper cut makes when it happens exactly at the word please. He learned that the dead are as uneven as the living. Concise, rambling, sly, kind. A letter in a tremoring hand told a daughter that her mother had put the family registry under the floorboard beneath the bath. Haru watched the daughter find it and held the ledger while she wept and laughed as if those 2 actions had always been meant to be twins. Actionable. A letter scrawled in a blocky, angry script named a pawn shop where a stolen watch lay in a drawer labeled hold. The owner returned it, ears and pride red. Actionable. A letter in perfect schoolgirl loops insisted that the cat had told her not to go to the river that day and that the cat had been right. Archive. A letter warned that a bus would jump its route number and find its way to a different district because numbers are tired of being numbers. Impossible. A letter said, "Do not leave the kettle on," and then listed a street and a time. He called the fire brigade. They were there when the kettle's cord sparked the way old cords do. Actionable. He slept at the station 3 nights in a row on a couch that disapproved of spines. Koga stood at the door once at 2 a.m., left a paper cup of vending machine corn soup on the file cabinet, and said nothing because he had found the lever-labeled silence that, when pulled, sometimes keeps a friend standing upright. Word spread beyond the building. A talk radio host called it Ghost Post and laughed in a way that gave his producers good numbers. An online paper ran a feature with anonymous quotes from someone close to the investigation that read like a person painting themselves as brave while standing behind a curtain. At the crematorium, the chalk line by the out-of-service door had been smeared and repainted, smeared and repainted. The cameras bloomed white more often. Onishi said, without drama, "It is breathing heavier." Suda wrote his logs as if each letter of each date could keep the building from turning its head. Haru kept his own list in a pocket notebook separate from case files. He did not label it debt, but that is what it was. For every letter he answered, he wrote the initials of whoever had been helped and put a small dot beside it. When he could not complete an errand, he put a dash. The dots outnumbered the dashes until they didn't. On the 4th day, a letter slid from the ash hatch into Onishi's hands with the slow confidence of a performer who knows the stage belongs to him. It was addressed to Detective Haru Tanaka in a neat, clerkly hand. Inside, the body of the text leaned left. An older man's writing, patient and proud. Detective, I was foreman at the Okada River Works project, retaining wall, South Bank, 2 summers ago. They said a man slipped. They said the cement went down in a hurry because rain was coming. They said a lot. My name is Shinji Toru. I did not slip. I fell because the bolt on the winch was wrong. A cheap brand stripped in first use. We called it in. The site manager called a friend at City Hall. A van with no markings came. They took the cameras for review and never returned them. They took the ledger page where I had written the bolt brand. You will find in the locker at Bay 4, upper shelf, a red ledger with a page torn. The stub is still there. The fiber matches the sheet in Director A. S-file at the Public Works office. The glue stain will mark it. They put me in the furnace with those men looking at their shoes. Tell my wife, SAE, that I did not drink at lunch. Tell her I wore the scarf she knitted even when it made the back of my neck itch. Tell her that the ledger will prove the Bolt brand, and the brand will prove the cover. The man who signed was Kanda. Shinji Toru. The names were not small. Director A. At Public Works could only be Shunpei Adachi, a man who had shook hands with 3 mayors and cut ribbons for twice as many projects. Kanda was not as precise a marker. Kyoto had more than one Kanda with a title, but within an hour of the letter, Haru's desk phone rang with a pattern he recognized. 3 short, 1 long, the rhythm of someone who liked to announce he had power without saying it. Detective Tanaka, the voice said, smooth as lacquer. Deputy Director Takuma Kanda, Prefectural Public Safety Commission. I hear you are entertaining unusual correspondence. I am evaluating evidence, Haru said. Excellent, Kanda said. I too am evaluating. Namely, whether certain patterns of behavior constitute professional misconduct. We are all under strain. The city is under a microscope. I am calling as a courtesy. Haru looked at the cart of letters outside his door. What is the courtesy about? A piece of paper that may have reached you, Kanda said, losing a sliver of polish. People write all sorts of things after death. Grief lies. Rumor reproduces. I would hate for an unverified allegation to become a headline. For the sake of the families. You believe families are best served by silence, Haru said. I believe families are best served by order, Kanda replied, and the room around Haru felt 3 degrees colder. Destroy the letter. There is no chain of custody you can defend. There is no judge who will entertain testimony from a furnace. Haru let silence sit. Men like Kanda try to fill it. Detective, Kanda said gentler, as if encouraging a dog off a sofa. We can make the next months either pleasant or very, very administrative. The choice is yours. My choice, Haru said, is to open Bay 4. He hung up before Kanda could decide whether to be offended or amused. He did not do Bay 4 alone. Koga came because Koga had an instinct for the moment a colleague needed a witness. They drove to the Riverworks warehouse, a concrete throat swallowing a metal tongue of a loading dock. An older guard flipped through a sign-in log with the careful slowness of the underpaid and nodded them inside. Bay 4 smelled like rope and rust. The lockers were gray steel, numbered without imagination. On the upper shelf of number 4 sat an old red ledger exactly where the letter said it would be, dust gray on top, finger shiny where someone had slid it forward once and reconsidered. Haru bagged it, logged it, photographed the dust prints, the shelf's lip, the way the ledger curled at the edge, the way some books do when they have waited too long. At the Public Works office, a clerk with an expression like polished neutrality let them see the project files. Adachi, Shunpei sat tabbed in tidy uppercase. Okada Riverworks had its own clean folder. Everything looked right. It looked right the way a staged house looks right. No magnets on the refrigerator, all cables tied behind the television. Haru found the ledger page, bolt specifications, supplier confirmation, and the tell that no one but a patient person would have noticed. The faint crescent of glue where a torn piece had once been attached and then peeled away with care. He pressed the red ledger's torn stub to the glue arc. The fiber frayed the same way on both sides. The curve matched. Koga whistled low through his teeth. You're going to make a lot of friends, he said. Call the prosecutor, Haru said. The call went through 3 secretaries and 1 silence. By the time they were back at the station, Haru had a meeting invite in his inbox. Deputy Director Kanda, 1700 hours, Conference Room B, and a bad taste in his mouth like a penny under the tongue. Conference Room B had been built to make men feel important by making them feel distant from the door. Kanda sat at the far end with a glass of water placed perfectly at his right hand and a file as slim as a blade before him. He was a handsome man in that plastic way power sometimes has. Flawless suit, flawless hair, a face that had exercised away its ability to express surprise. Detective, he said. Inspector. Koga nodded, a courtesy and a shield. Kanda touched the file. I have seen your, what to call them? Letters, he said, and impressed a smile onto the word. I understand the appeal. Storytelling has crept into police work through television. But the world is made of courts, not episodes. Haru kept his voice the temperature of glass. We have corroboration, physical ledgers, a glue arc that is older than your phone calls, a widow who remembers the scarf she knit. Charming, Candace said. Then, as if the word had shamed him, he wiped it away with professionalism. Detective, if you persist, you will drag the commission into a spectacle. You will damage your unit's credibility. You will make widows answer questions in rooms with bad lighting. I am offering you a way to choose your fights. I choose this one, Haru said. Candace's smile lowered an inch. Then consider this your official caution, he said, and slid a printed memo across the table. Guidance on handling non-traditional evidence sources, which was the bureaucratic way to say do less. Shred what you cannot source. Burn what you cannot defend. I don't burn letters, Haru said. Kanda looked amused for the first time. Then the fire will do it for you, he said. That is what it is for. Back in the bullpen, the carts had multiplied. Someone had started stacking the letters in shallow boxes to keep them from falling. A civilian aide had made a sign in thick marker. Please do not leave personal letters for debt. Tanaka, this is a police station. Someone had drawn a small ghost giving a thumbs up under it. The sergeant tore it down and put it back up with the ghost left on. Haru went back to triage. He marked Shinji Toru, actionable with 3 dots. He marked Okada River Works, prosecutor contacted. He marked Kanda, pressure in small print at the bottom of the board where he thought no one would look. He called Professor Hayama. They're coming faster, he said. Some of them are nonsense. Some are true in a way that makes my teeth hurt. Habits intensify when you exercise them, Hayama said, unruffled. You are carrying more. The house notices. Choose. How? Haru asked and hated the way the question sounded. Immediate harm first, Hayama said. Then items that can close a loop cleanly, heirlooms, apologies, simple boxes with simple keys. Avoid anything that asks you to rebuild a city from its foundation or to read yourself in public. And don't take the letters home. They arrive at home, Haru said. Then keep your home blank, Hayama said. Do not answer at your kitchen table. For a day, Haru managed to obey. He kept Mika in the drawer. He took his meals at the station, over a keyboard, with the petty dignity of a man who refuses to let a noodle fall where it shouldn't. He delegated where delegation would not crush a younger officer. He told a rookie how to talk to a widow about a tin without sounding like a magician. Then the letters began contradicting each other. One said a restaurant owner had set his own fire for the insurance. Another, signed by the same man's mother, said the neighbor had poured oil under the door. One said a lost boy had turned left at the shrine. Another said right. One told him a date that had already happened. One told him a date that never arrived. The impossible column fattened. Noise, Koga said, trying on the word like a coat. Every system gets noise. Debt collectors send more letters when you pay one, Haru said. They learn which doors open. He slept 2 hours on Wednesday night, an hour on Thursday afternoon in a chair that punished sleep, and not at all on Friday. He began to carry salt in his pocket, not because he believed Professor Hayama, but because he liked the feel of the small grains against his palm. A grit you could measure when everything else had become a fog. At midnight that Friday, he walked the furnace hall again. Onishi was at the far end, hands on the rail, looking into a dark window as if it might change its mind. Suda sat on a stool by the chalk line with a clipboard he was no longer writing on. Listen, Onishi said. Haru did. First, nothing. Then, thin as the sound a book makes when a page is turned in a quiet room, the shuffle of paper behind metal. The ash hatch latched. The chalk line sat, unbroken and too white. The air drew and released. A letter slid from the hatch, slow and smooth, and stopped exactly on the lip. Every time, Suda whispered, not to anyone, every time it knows where the edge is. Haru took the envelope with tongs because he had taught himself to be ridiculous on purpose when the ridiculous keeps the world from going soft. He bagged it, logged it, opened it. Detective, The table in conference room B has a drawer at the far end on the right with a notch inside the notch. It holds a flash drive, silver, small, given to Kanda by Adachi the week of the River Works incident. The camera in the ceiling will show him opening it at 1942 on a Tuesday. The key for the drawer is taped under the chair rail. If you pull up the rail, you will see the tape curl. Do not bring this letter with you. They will ask for it back. S. Toru. Haru looked at Suda and Onishi. I'm going to the station, he said. Now? Suda asked, because some questions must be asked even when the answer is obvious. Before the city wakes up, Haru said. Conference room B at 1:27 a.m. felt like a long, polished coffin. Haru slid his palm along the chair rail until he felt the slight roughness of tape's edge. He pried it up with a fingernail. The key was there, mean and small. The drawer resisted halfway open the way drawers do when they have been taught to stick out of spite, then yielded. Inside sat a silver flash drive that pretended to be ordinary. He bagged it and closed the drawer as if the room were watching him and preferred neatness. In the CCTV room, a tired tech rolled back at Tuesday's footage until 1942 watched itself become now. Kanda entered with the easy carriage of a man who knows doors aren't for stopping. Adachi joined him 3 minutes later carrying a folder. They did not look at each other the way friends do. They looked at each other the way men do when they share an understanding that requires fewer words than complicity usually does. Kanda opened the drawer. Adachi slid the drive inside. Kanda closed it. They arranged their faces before leaving, like men practicing for a mirror. Haru stood with his hands quiet at his sides and counted his breaths until they reached a number that made his voice safe. Copy this, he said to the tech. Twice. And copy the copy. At dawn, the carts were waiting. So was a memo from the commission reminding him of statutes regarding evidence provenance. So was a voicemail from Kanda, velvet over wire. We can still be polite about this. 10, the prosecutor called. We'll take the ledger. We'll take the drive. We won't take the letter, she said crisply. We don't need the letter to prove the other two. Do you understand me? I do, Haru said. And detective. Her voice softened a fraction. Whatever brought you to Bay for, keep it out of the testimony. He hung up and looked at the 3 columns on his whiteboard. Actionable had sprawled into a second column. Archive had been compressed into the lower right corner like a family photo in a wallet that doesn't quite fit. Impossible had grown a personality. A bus will change its number. The moon forgot to set. Don't stand in the yellow circle at Maritamachi Station at 11:11. He had started marking the predictions that came true with a small star. There were too many stars. By evening, he was back at the crematorium. The chalk line held. The air drew and released. Onishi polished a latch that didn't need polishing. Suda looked like a man trying to sit very still so as not to spill an overfull cup. Whatever you are doing, Suda said. Not accusing, not pleading, simply describing an equation. It is feeding it. I know, Haru said. He touched the pocket where the salt was and imagined it was heavy enough to lean him back from a cliff. I don't know how to stop without dropping people. People have dropped before, Onishi said. The ground knows how to carry them. We don't. Haru looked at the hatch. He thought of Professor Hayama's advice, immediate harm first, and of his own hand drawing the line down the whiteboard and of the pen refusing to write Mika after the number 3. He thought of Kanda's voice trying to domesticate threat into charm. He went home a little after midnight and found 3 envelopes on his doormat. One from someone who said his mother had never forgiven him for being late on Thursdays and that forgiveness had now been mailed. One from a boy who had drowned in a canal, telling his father that the bike was not at fault. The lock had jammed. One without a return at all, in a hand he did not recognize, containing only a single line. When the debt is too heavy, it will look like help. He did not open Mika's drawer. He set the salt on the table beside the kettle, counted 7 cracks in the blue bowl out loud because the act of counting made a rhythm his mind could hold, and waited for sleep that came like a favor he had not earned. Haru pushes past exhaustion and goes back into the furnace room at midnight, where the letters spill from the chute like snow and the fire says his name. The crematorium was supposed to sleep. At 0:17, Haru stood at the bottom of the cedar steps with the city behind him. River dark, vending machines bright, a bus far off keeping time for people he would never meet. The lobby lights were low. No families, no flowers. The receptionist desk held a neat square of absence where someone's hands had been at 5. He tested the side service door. It should have been keyed, but the latch hadn't seated. The door gave with a thin complaint. Rules. Announce yourself, request an escort, sign the log. Debt. The door was already open. He went in. Staff corridor. Concrete, warm air, the faint breath of the building working. The clock above the prep room read 0:21. On the clipboard, the last entry ended at 23:10. No overnight cycle scheduled. No unclaimed remains. Nothing in the book that would glow. Yet the furnace hall glowed. He saw it from 10 meters, the red line under the out-of-service placard, the taped control panel, the seam of heat it could not help leaking. The other 3 doors were dark and square, asleep like closed eyes. Number 4, sealed, held a light that was not reflected from anywhere, steady as a pilot flame. The chalk line was cleaner than he had ever seen it. Someone had chalked it fresh, a bright bone-white border. A heel print sat on it. The heel had smeared the chalk forward, not back. Someone had stepped out. Onishi, Haru called softly, though he knew the hall was empty. The sound died the way sounds do in rooms that don't owe you their echo. He took the salt from his pocket, the small paper twist Professor Hayama had given him. He wetted a finger, dabbed 3 grains to his tongue out of habit he did not believe in, and tucked the rest away. He did not cross the chalk. The air pulled, slow and regular. The camera in the corner bloomed white for half a second, then cleared. On the floor by the ash hatch lay 3 envelopes, not tossed, not dropped, arranged so their top edges aligned. He could see his name through the plastic window of one. Detective Haru Tanaka in a patient, clerkly hand. He took tongs from the wall, lifted the first envelope, slipped it into a bag, and logged the time on his phone. He did the second. The third ticked against the tongs metal like a coin. He bagged it. He waited. The hatch shivered. Paper slid forward and down. 1 envelope, then another, then a small drift, white on gray ash, white on black grate, slipping and collecting until the hatch lip wore a thin snowbank of letters. They came with a soft friction sound, the way pages sound when a person turns them not to read but to comfort themselves. The camera bloomed again. The smell changed. Hot iron, yes, but under it, ink. Burned, not burning. A library that had been held over coals, 1 book at a time. No cycles scheduled, he said aloud to keep his breath steady. He looked at the panel for doors 1 through 3 dark. For door 4, no status. Tape over the lights. Heat came through anyway. A low animal warmth, like a dog breathing behind a wall. He filled 3 bags, then 3 more, working without letting the rhythm take him. For every envelope he lifted, 2 more found the lip. He could have worked until dawn and not dented it. The ash in the hatch did not collect. It whisked away as if carried by a hand. The building exhaled. Inside the sealed door, something brightened. Not blue, not orange, a color thermometers don't name. He saw it in the small leakage at the seam, the way light found corners. He should have called Suda. He should have called Onishi. He should have called no one and left. He stepped closer to the chalk line and stopped there, toes at white. Beyond the steel, the glow moved. Not like flame tongues, not random. Slow, sectional, shapes learning themselves, edges trying to hold. He told himself it was heat shimmer, pareidolia, the brain's lazy habit of putting faces where they didn't belong. Then a mouth moved. No sound. Only the clear articulation of jaw and lips. Once, twice, a third time wider, as if the figure inside the brightness had figured out which muscles to remember. His name rode the air, not through his ears but along the bones beside them. Haru. He did not answer. He had practiced not answering. He drew the salt again and put a pinch on the floor just shy of the chalk line. The grains looked foolish and absolute. The envelopes kept coming. He worked again because working was the thing that hadn't yet failed him. Bag, zip, log, stack. He watched the hatch for a change he could name. The camera bloomed, cleared. The air tugged his sleeves. Haru. This time, breath warmed his cheek. No direction, just presence. You're not here, he said. You're a building and a habit. The glow thickened at the seam. The rusted hinge on the sealed corridor door. 10 meters down, the one with the grease pencil kanji half erased, ticked like cooling metal, though nothing had heated it. The ash hatch sighed. An envelope slid out that ignored gravity. It came to the lip and stopped by its own will, too firm, too centered, square to the line as if placed. It was clean as a page, edges crisp, the paper unscorched. No return stamp, no front address. On the back flap, in small block letters, "Don't." He stared at it. The letters were neither threat nor plea. They were a command he recognized from 100 crime scenes where the body had tried to tell anyone anything with the last motion it had left. He bagged that one separately. He kept going. From the glow, shapes coalesced. 3, then 5, then too many to count without giving away that he was counting. Faces. The kind people draw when they're first taught to draw faces, eyes, mouth, outline cut from heat. They moved their mouths and made no sound and made sound inside his head. Names. Some he'd read that week, some from years ago, one that emptied his lungs. Kite. He stepped back. The chalk line held under his heel like a hand that refused to let go. The ash hatch offered one more envelope, and he knew before he touched it that this one wasn't like the others. He didn't know how. He knew the way men know rain is about to start before the first drop touches skin. The paper was warmer. The edges had a faint orange memory, as if the flame had kissed them and then changed its mind. Across the front, his name was written in a hand he had practiced not seeing in any apartment since he had learned what the word widower did to rent contracts. Haru. Slanted as lifted T-bars, the impatience that sprinted through her lines. He lifted the envelope with tongs. He could have bagged it and walked and saved himself for another hour. He did not. He used his gloved hand because his hands had always been how he knew the world was real. He touched the paper. Heat bit him sharp, childish, mean. Not enough to break skin, but enough to make the nervous system announce itself. He flinched. The envelope slid. He caught it on reflex, glove slipping, skin finding paper. A clean burn found the pad of his thumb. He tasted copper on the back of his tongue because memory does that when pain wakes fast. He had the envelope. He had it against his palm. He didn't open it. Not yet. The glow behind the door fluttered, as if the room inside had laughed. He stood breathing through his teeth like a runner at the end of the wrong race. He set the envelope in a bag with the care of placing a child into a crib. He sealed it. He wrote the time. He did not write the word he wanted to write. Mika. The sealed corridor door ticked again. The grease pencil kanji over the knob looked different in the glow. The broken tail made more sense. Confess. Or submit. Or simply enter. He didn't. He gathered the stacked bags into a crate. He took the crate to the prep room because it had stainless counters and labels and fluorescent lights that made unkind honesty. He logged 6 as actionable, 3 as archive, 5 as impossible, and 1 as don't with no column at all. On his way out, he stopped at the chalk line one last time and stood with his toes to it until the pull in the air gentled. He said nothing. The building said nothing back. The glow dropped a degree, and the seam lost its color the way a bruise loses its purple. Outside, the air was cold enough to clean his lungs. He wrapped his thumb in a bandage from the glove box in his car and sat with the engine off until the windshield fogged and then cleared. At his apartment door, there was nothing on the mat. Inside, the table waited with its blue bowl and its 7 cracks. He set the bandaged hand on the wood and let it rest there until his heart came down. Then he took the last envelope from the bag, his name on the front, the heat mark fading at the edges, and held it up to the lamp. Through the paper, he could see the first line. Not ink shadow, not a trick of light. The confident weight of letters he knew the way you know your own gate in a dark hallway. Confession of Haru Tanaka, it began. Signed and witnessed. He opened it. The envelope is in his own hand, a confession of his death, dated next month, and a promise from the fire of what it intends to keep. The page had his handwriting and none of his memory. The lines kept their old geometry. The slanted A, the T-bars that tipped up when he was trying to be decisive, the habit of pressing too hard on the descenders like he wanted to pin them to the paper. At the top center, in blockier print, the print he used for forms to make clerks' lives easier, sat a title with a bureaucrat's severity. Confession of Haru Tanaka. Signed and witnessed. He read the first sentence 3 times because the grammar was correct and the meaning refused to be. I submit that on October 17th at approximately 1:03, I will enter the furnace corridor beyond the chalk line and burn with the last truth, in full recognition of what I do and why. The date was next month. The minute was indecently specific. He looked at the wall calendar where he never wrote birthdays and saw the square where that date lived, patient and white. Below, the confession became a ledger of motive in a hand that was his and a mind that did not ask his permission. I will go because the debt has outgrown the drawer where I keep my own letters. I will go because I kept what should have been carried and asked others to carry what I could not lift. I will go because the fire wants my voice on its side of the door if it is to keep writing. I will go because I have read a letter I promised not to open. His thumb throbbed under the bandage. He touched the line that said promised not to open without meaning to. The paper was warm the way a body is warm when you finally admit you have a fever. At the bottom, without flourish, you will burn with the last truth. Haru Tanaka. There was a space for a witness signature. It was blank. The blank felt worse than a name. He set the letter down on the table beside the blue bowl with 7 cracks. He put his hand flat to the wood and counted the cracks aloud because counting was a ritual and rituals keep men from giving their names to fire. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The last crack, the hair-thin one that only appeared when light hit at an angle, refused and then revealed itself, as if embarrassed to be part of the whole. He called Professor Hayama because he needed a voice old enough to speak softly to a cliff. "It's in my hand," Haru said. "Of course it is," Hayama replied, not unkindly. "It has been practicing. It has a date. Dates are for clerks," Hayama said. "Clerks love to pretend the future can be filed." Then, after a beat, "Do not go to it tonight. The debt will tempt you to balance the book early. Let the ledger sit. I can't not look at it. Put it in a different room," Hayama said. "Leave a light on in that room so you don't imagine it breathing. Carry the salt and remember the old rule. Refuse the first bargain. The first bargain is never the cheapest." Haru stood in the doorway between rooms with the letter in his hand. The apartment looked like a diagram of a life he'd chosen not to redraw. He placed the letter in the locked drawer, the one that already held the other letter with kite in it, and turned the key until the cabinet clicked its small, loyal click. Sleep came in loose stitches that didn't hold. When his eyes snapped open at 0:29, the city outside his window had the bright quiet of a machine in maintenance mode. He drank water and tasted metal and decided that he had not decided anything. He put the salt in his pocket and his badge in the other, left the lamp on over the locked drawer, and stepped out into a hallway that smelled like soap and old curry. The crematorium stood like a patient clerk at the top of its hill. The cedars kept their counsel. The service door, which had obligingly failed earlier, was keyed this time. He rang a bell that was really a door chime trying to be polite about interruptions. Onishi opened, eyes bare and unsurprised. "It's not a shift," he said, which was an accusation and a greeting. "I need to see the hall," Haru said. Onishi looked at his thumb bandage, then at his eyes. "You shouldn't," he said, and stood aside anyway. "Suda is at the desk pretending to approve invoices. We didn't schedule cycles. The chalk line is new." Suda looked up from the clipboard when Haru passed the lobby. He didn't ask a question. He said, "We should close," and put the pen down as if that constituted closing. In the furnace hall, the out-of-service placard hung with its precise apology. The chalk line shone like a bone on an X-ray. No glow at the seam. No whispering drafts. No camera bloom. Quiet, in that wrong way quiet sometimes is, like a stage before a curtain lifts. Haru set the salt where his hand wanted to be. He waited 5 breaths. He took the letter from his coat. the confession that used his name and handwriting like a borrowed suit, and held it up by a corner. "Don't," Suda said quietly. He didn't feed it to the hatch. He held it and spoke to air. "I'm here," he said. "If this bargain exists, it will be named, not implied." The air drew in, not like a room but like a chest. The sealed door gave a soft, tinny click, the sound of metal acknowledging heat. The seam brightened a hair, not color, not light, tension. A breath warmed his cheek again, like the ghost of a hand. "Haru." He didn't answer with words. He took a step to the chalk line and did not cross it. He folded the confession once and set it on the floor, exactly on the line, so half the page lay on the safe side and half over the white. The paper trembled, not from draft, as if a finger had touched the ash of a fire months dead. Without sound, the ash hatch unlatched and lowered an inch. The invisible breath held. The camera blinked white and cleared. The page blackened along the edge that hung over the chalk and did not blacken where it touched the safe floor. Letters went from ink to charcoal without crumbling. The word burn grew darker first, as if called by a friend. The hatch lifted again, slow as a person rising from a bath. A single envelope slid out and stopped with its top edge kissing the confessing page, like a seal kissing wax. He picked up the new envelope with tongs, then with his own hand because tongs lie about weight. It was heavier than it looked. On the front, in his hand again, addendum to confession. He opened it. Inside, one line centered, spaced as if lawful. Witness, M. Tanaka. He felt the floor tilt under the word. Mika did not belong in rooms where witnesses were needed. Mika belonged to a river in summer and a bowl with cracks and a word that meant the same thing as stay when she said it. "Enough," Haru said, which was not a plan so much as a limit disguised as a word. The sealed door brightened 2 shades. Inside, the shapes learned their mouths and moved them in a chorus. There was no sound, but there were names. 100, 1,000. The hall didn't grow louder, he did. He stepped back from the chalk line and scraped the confession page fully to his side with the edge of the tongs. Ash marked the floor like gray rain. He slid the page into a bag. He slid the addendum into another. He swallowed because his mouth had rewired itself to forget how. "Take the power," Suda said suddenly, voice tight. "If you're going to stand where bargains get made, take the only thing you can take." "What power?" Haru asked, and hated the way his voice looked at the ground when it said power. "To choose what you carry," Onishi said. "To choose when. To choose the word no and teach it to the building." He wanted to laugh, and the laugh wanted to be a sob, and those two argued until neither went out into the air. He looked at the chalk line, at the shiny, innocent latch of the ash hatch, at the careful tape over the out-of-service panel. He took the salt out of his pocket, untwisted the paper, and made a thin line of it parallel to the chalk, a second border, one that meant nothing to the building and everything to the man drawing it. He wrote, with salt, a small crooked word inside his own line. No. Then he picked up the crate of letters that had gathered themselves without his permission and walked. He felt the heat rise behind him like a crowd standing to see the end of a performance. He did not look back until the hallway turned. When he did, the sealed door seam had gone from attention to flame. Real flame now, gold and rushing, a roar that belonged to physics. And for a moment, just one, the glow shaped itself into a figure so perfectly him that his chest forgot the difference between breath and grief. The mouth of the shape moved once more. Haru, and then, like a tender cruelty, kite. The roar climbed as if recognizing its subject and wanting to speak in a louder tongue. The chalk line held. The salt line did not catch. It steamed and went dull. The tape over the panel bubbled at a corner. The bubble hardened. Suda's hand closed on Haru's sleeve. "Out," he said low. "Now." They left the hall at a pace that refused to be called a run. The lobby air felt thin and very old. Outside, the cedars thrashed once without wind and went quiet again, like people in a row who have decided not to make a problem into an emergency. On the steps, Haru sank to the stone because the stone was not a person and would not ask him a question. He pressed the bagged confession to his knee. The ink inside the plastic looked calm. He wasn't. Onishi stood just inside the service door, hands on the jamb, eyes on the corridor the way a man watches a dog that has never bitten him do a thing dogs do before they bite. Next month, Haru said aloud, because men check their own sentences for weak boards by walking on them. October 17th. It thinks it owns the line of my calendar. Then break the calendar, Suda said, simple as sweeping. Haru nodded once too hard. He thought of Hayama's joke that wasn't about salt. He thought of Kanda and Adachi and ledgers that lied without ink. He thought of Mika saying tomorrow and meaning it. He stood, lighter by some unit that didn't map to kilograms, heavier by others. He looked back into the hall one last time. The roar had settled. The seam cooled. The chalk line glowed only because chalk glows under certain lights. The salt line looked foolish and stubborn. He liked it. He walked down the steps with the bagged confession inside his coat, the addendum in his pocket like a stone, and the very specific minute 103 ticking at the back of his head like a clock he intended to throw away. The authorities seal the crematorium for structural reasons. The letters stop and then find Haru at home. He tries to burn them, but ash reforms into words, and he chooses a bargain of his own. The notice went up on a Tuesday. Laminated paper on stanchions in the drizzle, the municipal seal stamped too many times to look confident. Temporary closure. Structural assessment. Entry restricted pending review. Contact. Public Works. Director's office. Red tape crossed the lobby doors like a polite refusal. Suda stood behind the desk with his hands folded on nothing. Onishi carried the key ring without the weight of doors to open. Kanda appeared for exactly 6 minutes and 30 seconds with a camera following 3 steps behind and a vocabulary of concern. Out of an abundance of caution, he said to the lens, and nothing to the men who had chalked the line. By sunset, the hall was quiet behind its seals. The chalk glowed a last time in Haru's mind, bright as bone. The carts at the station thinned, then stopped. Talk radio found a new storm. The online paper turned to gossip that could be sued without metaphysics. For 2 nights and 1 long day, Haru's apartment stayed clean of paper. He ate a bowl of noodles like a person living between things he could name. He counted the 7 cracks in the blue bowl and did not miscount. He put the confession and its addendum in the locked drawer and left the lamp on. He slept in pieces that felt mended. On the 3rd night, he woke to the sound of pages turning in a room with no one in it. The table looked the same until he turned on the lamp. Ash lay on the wood in a thin, deliberate drift. Lines. Loops. A sentence forming itself grain by grain, the way frost writes on glass if you stand very still and wish it won't. He watched the ash complete its last letter with a patience that mocked his heart. We remember. He swept the ash into the sink with the edge of a postcard and opened the tap. The gray went dark, then light, then gone. When he straightened, the table held a new layer already. 2 words this time, the grains aligning as if obeying a magnet the eye couldn't see. Read me. He laughed once, short and wrong, because the table was behaving like a clerk who had learned to leave notes. He took the kettle from the stove and set it on the balcony. He set a baking tray on the range, opened the drawer where he kept things bought for barbecues he never attended, and struck a match. Flame rose, honest as bread. He burned 3 letters sent to his door. 1 with a tenant's complaint about a landlord's stolen bicycle. 1 with a mother's apology to a daughter whose wedding she had ruined with a speech. 1 with a prediction about the number painted on a bus that no longer ran. He watched each go from paper to ember to collapse. He lifted the tray and shook the ash into the sink and watched the swirl. He said out loud, to the room and the heat, "No." When he turned, the ash blew back up from the drain and settled on the table in a polite square. It wrote without hurry, "The daughter lives on Takatsu Street. The bicycle is in the closet under the stairs. The wedding needs someone to carry the veil." He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose until the headache came forward and pushed the rest away. He thought of Professor Hayama's warning that bargains begin as help. He thought of Onishi's simple gospel, choose what you carry. He made a rule. He sat at the table and wrote it on a blank card in block letters, like a man making a sign no one would see but him. Rule 1, immediate harm first. Rule 2, no names I want to keep. Rule 3, do not cross at midnight. Rule 4, Do not open letters written in Mika's hand. Rule 5, deliver, do not dwell. He taped the card to the inside of his cupboard door. It looked ridiculous and necessary. In the morning, he went to the daughter on Takatsu Street, knocked, and said the words a stranger must say to be allowed to look under a stair. In the afternoon, he told a landlord where he would find a bicycle before the boy who had taken it spent his apology on panic. In the evening, he walked into a small rented hall and, without saying his name, carried a veil 3 steps so a mother could sit with her hands clenched around a handkerchief and watch her daughter move forward in white like a small, stubborn miracle. When he came home, an envelope waited on the mat. Plain, cream, no postmark. His name and the as slanted like they were trying to keep up with a thought. He held it and did not open it. He put it in the locked drawer with the confession and listened to the click. He told himself the sound meant later. He told himself the sound meant never. The next day, he typed a letter that people file and forget. To Inspector Koga. Subject: resignation. Effective immediately. Reason: conflict of interest. Inability to guarantee separation of personal correspondence from casework. He signed it with the steady hand he reserved for things that end. He printed it because the act of printing made it real to people who distrust email. He carried it to Koga's desk and set it down. Koga read it once the way men read a map of a familiar neighborhood that has been rezoned overnight. He set it on the desk and looked at Haru, then at the door, then at the letter again. "I'm supposed to argue," he said. "You'll save your breath." Koga nodded, a small bow to a choice already made. "You'll keep me out of whatever this is," he said. "Not a question." "I'll keep you out," Haru said. Koga stood and held out a hand. The handshake was quiet and old-fashioned, and all the things men do when they need to say "I saw you" without making any more trouble for the present than the past already has. News of his resignation broke the way news breaks when it isn't the story people wanted. Second page on a slow day, a line on the talk radio station between a weather update and a joke about traffic. Kanda's memo congratulated the force on its commitment to traditional evidentiary standards, and Adachi took a medical leave that looked like a strategy. The crematorium remained sealed. Public Works issued 2 more statements. An orange net went around the cedar steps as if danger were a matter of ankles. Suda boxed his ledgers and took vacation he didn't know what to do with. Onishi sat on his balcony in the afternoons and watched a piece of the river that did not change and pretended that meant something. The letters did not care about seals or ledgers or memos. They came to Haru's apartment, and when he took the long way home to test whether distance mattered, they were on his doormat anyway. When he left by the back stairs and returned by the alley, one slid from under the door as he turned the key. When he went to a hotel for a night to make the room in his apartment stop breathing, the envelope waited on the hotel bed with the tuck of the sheet undone the way housekeepers do it when they believe in courtesy as an art. He burned what did not meet Rule 1. The ash kept writing, sometimes on the table, once on the floorboards, once on the fogged bathroom mirror where his face broke into 100 damp versions. It wrote backwards there. He read it in the glass without touching it with a towel. He delivered what he could. He told a young man that the safe deposit key was taped under the drawer of the desk he was about to sell. He told a woman that her father had written her real name inside the cover of a cheap dictionary and that she could claim it at the second-hand shop on Teramachi if she went before noon. He told a boy to lift the rug under his bed and watched him find a tin of small, gentle coins his grandfather had saved to teach him how to save. He kept midnight out of his rooms. He kept the chalk line in his head. On the night marked October 17th in his calendar, the minute smug as a stamp, he did not go to the hill. He sat at his table in a shirt that needed ironing and poured barley tea and counted the 7 cracks and said Mika's name under his breath once, as if that made a charm. At 1:03, a bus hissed at the stop 2 blocks away, and a malcontent drain gurgled, and a cat on the alley fence made the sound cats make when they see what they aren't sure is there. The apartment did not burn. The drawer with the lock did not open on its own. He slept after, not because he deserved it, but because the body has its own bargains. In the morning, an envelope lay on the mat. Same cream paper. No stamp. His name. The impatient hand that had written kite enough times to justify its impatience. He lifted it and did not open it. He turned it over. On the back flap, a single word in small neat print. Not her hand. Not his. Later. He carried it to the drawer and set it beside the confession and the addendum. He locked the drawer and put the key on its nail. He stood there until he proved to himself that the lamp's light was not heat. The ash on the table arranged 3 words in the time it took him to breathe twice. You bargained well. He wiped the words away with the side of his hand. A gray smear marked his skin like a vow. Outside, the sealed hill held its silence. Inside, the letters learned a new address. The city, indifferent and constant, hummed in its lanes. Haru made tea and watched the steam rise and gave it no names. Years later, the letter arrived without fanfare, cream envelope, machine-stamped return, Kyoto crematorium. It slid under a different office door, across a different linoleum, and came to rest against the shoe of Detective Aiko Shimura, who had taken the kind of cases that leave a little iron taste in the mouth. Her name was written in a steady, clerkly hand. Inside, a single line, centered, no greeting, no sign-off. The fire remembers him still. She turned the envelope over twice, expecting the ordinary tricks. Microprinting, a water stain, a thumbprint left by a hurrying clerk. The paper was clean. The room felt a half-degree warmer for no reason the thermostat could prove. Aiko had heard the story the way younger detectives always do, pieced from hall talk and old case memos, more legend than file. A man named Haru Tanaka who read mail from the wrong side of the latch. A chalk line in a furnace hall. A resignation typed on a day when the city preferred its police to be deaf. She called the crematorium out of caution. A new receptionist answered with a voice trained to make grief feel less alone. Suda had retired, the woman said. He sometimes brought chrysanthemums no one had ordered and left before anyone could thank him. Onishi had died in his sleep with a ring of keys on the nightstand and the balcony door open to river air. The hill had been assessed twice and found sound. The out-of-service door was now framed by fresh paint, the chalk line redrawn for safety, though no one would say what, exactly, it protected. Aiko took a bus to a quiet street in a quiet ward and stood in front of a second-floor door with a nameplate that still said H. Tanaka in small black letters. She had prepared the kinds of sentences that let strangers say difficult things without feeling watched. She knocked. The chain slid. The door opened the polite width strangers allow. The man behind it was leaner than the legend, the way time economizes people, but his eyes had the calm that comes from having argued with something larger than himself and chosen simple answers. Aiko Shimura, she said, showing her badge out of respect more than requirement. I received a letter. I think it belongs to you as much as to me. Does it? He asked, not unkindly. It says the fire remembers you, she said. Still. He tasted the sentence the way some men test tea. Not for sweetness, but for mineral truth. He opened the door fully and stepped back. Come in, he said. Tea is safer than coffee with certain topics. The apartment was the clean kind that meant I keep only what I can carry. The kettle steamed. On the table sat a blue bowl with 7 hairline cracks that found themselves when light moved. A small card was taped inside a cupboard door. Aiko's eyes skated over the block letters without meaning to. Rule 1. Immediate harm first. Rule 2. No names I want to keep. Rule 3. Do not cross at midnight. Rule 4. Do not open letters written in Mika's hand. Rule 5. Deliver, do not dwell. She set the cream envelope beside the bowl. He didn't touch it. Does it say anything else? He asked. Only that line. He nodded, as if the line had been expected the way winter is expected. Not because you marked a date, but because you have lived through enough of them. He poured tea. The steam carried barley and something like clean paper. People think these letters want headlines, he said. They mostly want errands finished. What errand is this? Aiko asked. None, he said. It's a receipt. They sat a while with the kind of silence that doesn't require management. The apartment listened the way good rooms do. Somewhere a neighbor set a cup down too hard. The sound traveled like an apology. Aiko looked at the locked drawer in the corner, the one with a key hook above it and an old brass key on the hook, dull from being touched. Do you ever open it? She asked. I open it when I can stand to read without thinking I can fix what I'm reading, he said. That isn't often. He stood and crossed to the drawer. He did not take the key down. He set his hand flat on the wood the way men do at graves when speaking aloud would be an insult to the work grief has already done. If you're asking whether the fire is a case, he said, it isn't. Not in the way courts like. It's a habit the city learned and can't entirely unlearn. We live with those. We draw our lines. We decide what crosses. And if you're asking whether it will stop, he added, turning back to her with a small, stubborn smile, it won't, but it can be taught manners. How? She asked. Carry what matters, he said. Refuse the bargains that feel like credit. Don't let it tell your story in your voice. She nodded. It sounded like advice for a fire. It sounded like advice for a career. When she left, the hallway was warm in the way buildings get after sun has been on their backs all day. On the landing, a draft folded itself around her wrist. No temperature, only the suggestion of breath. She did not look back because people's lives are not for checking once they've been returned to them. In the apartment, Haru stood alone with the kettle and the blue bowl and the cream envelope that did not belong to either of them. He lifted the envelope anyway and set it inside the locked drawer with the others. The key made its small loyal click. He left the lamp on because light is a good habit. The room was quiet long enough for him to decide that quiet could be trusted. Then from inside the drawer, no louder than a page turned in a library, came the faintest rustle. He didn't open it. He poured tea and counted the 7 cracks. The last one revealed itself when the steam shifted, as it always did, as it always would. Down the hill, the crematorium's new paint dried. At night, the chalk line glowed for no one. Some hours, the sealed door was only a door. Some hours, if you stood very still, you could feel the slow draw of air along a corridor the city had built for itself centuries ago. A draft trained by witness and habit and the thing that words do when they refuse to stay burned. Somewhere, a young detective sorted an inbox of impossible mail into actionable, archive impossible, not because she believed in ghosts, but because people still needed their errands finished. Somewhere, a daughter found a key under a drawer and a boy lifted a rug and an old woman's recipe reappeared in her grandchild's handwriting with the salt measured correctly at last. The fire did what it has always done. Consumed. It warmed. It remembered. And the city went on. Fire is supposed to be an ending. In Kyoto, it became a witness, patient, bureaucratic, utterly relentless. Haru Tanaka learned that debt can look like help, and that the most dangerous bargains speak in the voices we trust. Years later, the letters keep their small errands moving through the world. Not headlines, closures. Thank you for listening to Somnolent Conspiracies. If you enjoyed tonight's case, subscribe, tap the bell, and leave a review. It helps these stories find the people who are still looking for them. Fire consumes the body, but sometimes it leaves behind what truth cannot burn.